Good morning. My name is Allie Schulman. I'm one of the pastors here, and I'm so glad that you decided to join us this week in particular. We're inching our way through a sermon series during Lent. And during Lent, we're specifically thinking about this question that is, who is Jesus? Who is Jesus? That question alone, in certain periods of history, depending upon which answer you gave, could determine where your life went, whether you were safe or not. This question that seems so simple at first has shaped entire empires. It has challenged entire rooms of really smart people for a very long time. It's a question that doesn't quite stop. Who is Jesus? Is he just a nice guy? Is he a prophet? Did he have really good teachings, but we're not quite sure? Is he God? Depending on the answer of that question, well, people have left families and comfort and careers based on what they believed was the answer to that question. We've been thinking about, as we inch towards Easter, what is our answer to that question? And we don't want to just go in blindly, so we've been looking at specifically 7 statements that Jesus makes in the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John is one of 4 Gospels in the New Testament. John is the last one. It's the one that was written last as well. And in it, Jesus says 7 things about who he is. These statements, I am the bread of life, I am the light of the world, I am the gate. These statements, all of them, don't just tell us who Jesus is, they also are kind of an invitation to show us who we are. So for example, I'm the bread of life. It teaches us that when we follow the bread of life, we hunger for more than what the world has to offer. When we walk in the light, we don't have to hide anymore. We can live open and honestly. When we pass through a gate, we can ignore all the distracting voices around us and follow the path even though no one else is. You see, these aren't just declarations about who Jesus is. They are also invitations to become the person that Jesus calls us to be. And today, we're going to look at one more of those declarations, one more of those statements. And this one in particular is very related to what we learned about last week. So if you haven't listened to Stephen's sermon last week, I highly recommend that you do. It will be really helpful because both of the statements, his and the one I'm looking at today, they're in actually the very same passage of Scripture in John 9. And so I think it's important that before we go into our statement that we're looking at today, we need to first review what we learned last week. So where we're going to start is actually in John 9. So John 9 is the story of a blind man who gets healed. He gets healed on the Sabbath day. And this is a big deal. This is a problem, right? Because the Pharisees are really upset that he gets healed. And it's a really interesting story. It's longer than most healing stories because there's a lot of back and forth. The guy who gets healed, he gets questioned, he runs into his house, his parents disown him. The Pharisees want to know more and more, like, how did this happen? No. How exactly did this happen? Tell us the details, because they're trying to pin the crime on Jesus. There's all this back and forth in the healing, and finally, the healed man comes to Jesus. And Jesus converts this man, tells him that he is the Son of God. And then from there, from John 9, we get into John 10. And that's where we started last week. You see, John 10 is an explanation of what just happened in John 9. Does that make sense? You see, John, he wrote later than some of the other apostles. And so when we're reading his book, we need to understand that he was trying to tell a certain story. He wanted to make sure that the Christians, who at this point were being persecuted, knew their own story, that they knew exactly what had happened with Jesus. He didn't want to leave anything unclear. He didn't want the healing to just be interpreted as a healing. He wanted to make sure that you knew what that healing was about. And so in John 10, he very helpfully writes, I assure you, I am the gate of the sheep. All who came before me were thieves and outlaws, but who the sheep didn't listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief enters only to steal, kill, and destroy. I came so that they could have life. Indeed, so that they could live life to the fullest. Honestly, I'm not really sure that helped really much. People understand what that healing is about. Does that help you? Do you understand what that healing is about? Not so much. Not so much. And I think that's why, actually, the next time, I think that's why he goes to that second metaphor. I think it's why we need 2 I am statements in this piece. It's why that we need further explanation. It's not just that Jesus is the gate who needs and leads us to life in the fullest. It's also the next part, which says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Okay. Maybe we're starting to collect some of the pieces of data of what exactly John is trying to tell us about what happened in John 9. Maybe this has more to do about something other than physical eyesight. Maybe this has to do with spiritual vision. Maybe this is something more. And so we keep reading, and he says, when the hired hand sees the wolf coming, he leaves the sheep and runs away. Because he isn't the shepherd. The sheep aren't really his. So the wolf attacks the sheep and scatters them. He's only a hired hand, and the sheep don't matter to him. I am the good shepherd. I know my own sheep, and they know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. I give up my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that don't belong to this sheep pen, and I must lead them too. They will listen to my voice, and there will be one flock with one shepherd. This is why the Father loves me. I give up my life so that I can take it again. No one takes it from me, but I give it up because I want to. I have the right to give it up, and I have the right to take it up again. I received this commandment from my Father. Okay, I read that all the way through, but today what we're going to do is we're going to break it down verse by verse. So actually, if you do have a phone, would recommend that you break it out. Otherwise, you can do it on the screen, but we're going to go and look at this verse by verse, because what I want us to be thinking about is what exactly is Jesus, through John, trying to tell us about himself? What is his answer to who is Jesus? Okay, so let's start with that first one. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. What's interesting to me about this phrasing is that he doesn't say, I'm the efficient shepherd, or I'm the strategic shepherd. He says, the good shepherd. And what's interesting to me, too, is that how does he define good? What is good for Jesus? Good is someone who lays down his life for the sheep. Good is someone who would risk everything, even his own life, to protect those that he loves. His love is so complete that to be good means to operate in this world of sacrificial love. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep, which, to be honest, feels a little excessive for a shepherd, but alas, here we are. And then the next part he goes into, because he wants to make this comparison. When the hired hand sees the wolf coming, he leaves the sheep and runs away. Who, my friends, is the hired hand in this passage? Who is it? Y'all know this. One in John 9, who are the people that he's trying to go against, that he's trying to defend his work from? Who? Pharisees. Y'all know this. Lovely. Okay, the Pharisees. So in this passage, he is throwing what? He is throwing shade at the Pharisees. Yes, he's saying, like, I'm going to use this analogy. You're totally going to get that I'm talking about you, but I can be defensible and I can say that I'm not talking about you, right? The hired hand. The hired hand sees the wolf coming. And it's so interesting that the hired hand runs when things get dangerous. But why does he run? He runs because he isn't the shepherd. He isn't the shepherd. The sheep aren't really his. That's what it means to be a shepherd. The sheep are a part of you. So the wolf attacks the sheep and scatters them. He's only a hired hand, and the sheep don't matter to him. The hired hand was just there for a paycheck. He was just there for his own glory. His relationship to the sheep was just transactional. But the shepherd stays. The shepherd is invested. The shepherd moves towards danger and does not calculate the risk. The shepherd would give everything to provide for the needs of these sheep. Because the sheep just aren't part of the job. They're part of him. And then Jesus repeats, I am the good shepherd. I know my own sheep and they know me, just as the Father knows me and I know the Father. I give up my life for the sheep. It's not this casual kind of knowing. I mean, that's pretty wild, that the sheep know Jesus in the same way that Jesus knows the Father. The sheep know Jesus in the same way that Jesus knows the Father. That type of knowledge, that type of knowing, it goes beyond just knowing your name, just knowing what you do on Sundays, just knowing the little actions you take. It's a deeper type of knowing, to know your motivations, who you are at your core, who you hide. All that type of knowing is how we get to know Jesus. His sheep can know him just as Jesus knows the Father. And then Jesus kind of does this 180, or it seems like this aside. And he says, I have other sheep that don't belong to this sheep pen. I must lead them too. They will listen to my voice, and there will be one flock and with one shepherd. And you can so imagine the Pharisees. This is like a record scratch to them. Like, what? Excuse me? Even us a little bit, right? Who is Jesus talking about in here? Who is this? Is it someone who worships with laser lights and smoke machines? Is it the Baptist? Is it the people who voted for Kamala? Is it the people who voted for Trump? Who is this? Who could this be? Jesus says he has another flock, one that we don't know about, one that is different from our flock. And y'all, if you can take anything from this, who gets to decide who's in that flock? Jesus. Not you. Not me. Not the boundaries of the church. Jesus is the shepherd who decides who's in and who's out. I think he threw that one in there just to put a nail in the coffin with the Pharisees, right? You're not going to tell me who's in or who's out. That's not your job. That's mine. And then he continues, and he says, this is why the Father loves me. I give up my life so that I can take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I give it up because I want to. I have the right to take it up again. I have received this commandment from my Father. That's the end. It's kind of this last paragraph in John 10. And what he's doing here is he's explaining what's about to happen. John wrote several years, 50, 60 years after Jesus died. Everyone knows that Jesus has been crucified and raised to the dead. John is trying to address the rumor that perhaps Jesus just died, that there wasn't actually any resurrection. And Jesus and John says, no. I died by my own choice. I was not cornered. I am not a victim. I gave up my own life willingly out of love for you. And I have the power to raise myself up again. He's addressing those rumors here, describing what it means to be a shepherd, an odd, granted, token of being a shepherd, but a shepherd nonetheless. So that's the passage that we have right here. That's the passage that we're going to talk just a little bit more about. But I want us to think about the answer to that question, right? We came in with the question, who is Jesus? Who is Jesus in John 10:11 through 18? Well, Jesus is the good shepherd who lays down his life for his sheep. He doesn't run when things get hard. His relationship with us is not transactional. He knows his sheep like the Father knows the Son, so this deep, intimate sense of knowledge. He includes people that you'd never expect, people you don't even know. He gives up everything and yet still holds authority, still holds power. It's this weird kind of paradox of sacrificial love, but also power in that sacrificial love. Jesus is the good shepherd. Well, I promised you that the answer to that question, who is Jesus, I promised that it would be an invitation to you, right? It's not just telling us who Jesus is. It's not saying that Jesus is the good shepherd, although that's important. There is an invitation for you there too. So if Jesus is the good shepherd, then what are you? What is your calling? If Jesus is the good shepherd, then you, my friends, then we are sheep. I know, it's not the sexiest answer in the world, but alas, here we are. I think sheep kind of get a bad rap, actually, honestly. We always imagine them as like really passive, like weak animals. And to be fair, there are quite a few examples of that. But they're actually also kind of intelligent. Did you know that sheep can self-medicate themselves? Like when their tummy hurts, they know to go find certain kinds of grass. I think that's so weird, but it's true. We aren't actual sheep, but there is something in that metaphor that we need to understand, that Jesus wants us to understand. Because Jesus isn't just telling us who he is in this passage. He's telling us who we are. What does Jesus want us to know about sheep? I think there's one main thing, maybe two, that we need to learn from this. If we're sheep, we need to remember. Sheep need a shepherd. Sheep have to have a shepherd. There's this really awful, terrible story from 20 years ago or so that made the news, where in this ravine in Turkey, there were shepherds actually guarding their flocks. And these other shepherds were off on this other hill, and they watched the flock of another shepherd come up the mountainside. And then one by one, they watched sheep jump off a cliff to their death, and they just kept going one by one until there were 1,000 sheep, 1,001, that jumped off the cliff. They're really stupid. But they did jump off the cliff. Not all of them died, don't worry. Really gruesomely, they made a pillow, and then the others didn't die. It's terrible, terrible, terrible. But it did happen. So those sheep, my God, they needed a shepherd. Do you know what he was doing? He was eating breakfast. That's why he wasn't with the sheep. He was eating breakfast. And it just occurred to me, he thought he could leave his sheep. No, my God, the sheep need a shepherd. They do really stupid stuff. They sacrifice their own lives for no reason at all if they don't have a shepherd. And you think, well, God, I don't need a shepherd. I don't need a shepherd. And I just think, y'all, have you seen Facebook lately? Have you seen what Twitter has devolved into? Have you seen the cliffs that we're willing to jump off of for no reason at all? Y'all, we have a whole industry based on this idea that we're dumb, that we follow wherever someone leads. I think more or less advertising believes that. Do you know that in 2023, we spent $2.3 billion on impulse buys off Instagram? It wasn't even the whole thing. It was just Instagram. Impulse buys. things we didn't need, things we definitely didn't plan on needing, just things that we saw an ad that said, this water bottle will change your life, and we bought it. We bought it, and we believed it. Do you remember a few years ago, or maybe it was a few years ago, when people started cooking chicken in NyQuil because they thought it would relieve flu symptoms? This really happened. And the FDA, like a good parent, had to come out and say, y'all, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. And those of you who are old enough remember when people started eating Tide Pods, voluntarily, because someone on the internet told them. We are not bright as a collective. We follow where people lead. And honestly, we don't question too much about the follower. We go where people go without asking a bunch of questions. We're reactive and we're not reflective most of the time. We are sheep. And by God, do we need a good shepherd. If we need a shepherd, if we are the sheep, then what does it mean to be a good sheep? What does it mean to follow well? So sheep aren't the brightest. They do a lot of stupid stuff. But the one thing that they're actually pretty good at is recognition. They can remember up to 50 faces and way more voices for 2 years. So if you met a sheep, they'll remember that, and then they'll remember you 2 years later, and scientists have measured this. But it's even more incredible for voices. They can pick out certain voices with incredible consistency. They can recognize their shepherd's voice. It's what allows them to live. It's what allows them to avoid danger. They can recognize their shepherd's voice. And if we are going to be good sheep, then we better start working on those recognition skills. Now here's the thing. I know that so many of you yearn to hear the voice of God. You've heard people mention it, for sure. People have talked about it. You hear it in the Bible, but you also have heard it in real life. And you think, gosh, if I only had God to speak to me, then I would know what to do. I would totally follow God. I mean, look at the Israelites. They had a frickin' cloud of smoke. If I had a cloud of smoke, then I would totally know what to do, and I would follow it. If I had manna from heaven, I would definitely follow God. I would know that God was speaking to me. We're so sure that if we heard the voice of God, then we'd listen. But we don't. We sit in prayer. We close our eyes like we're supposed to. Sometimes we do even more elaborate things, and we read the Bible and all this stuff, and we hear no, nothing, nada, zilch. And we think, gosh, God's just not speaking to me. But what if the problem isn't that God's not speaking? What if the problem is that you don't know how to recognize his voice? What if it actually isn't about finding a new way to pray or finding out how to listen better? What if it's about you becoming the kind of person who regularly listens for God? That's the question that we actually need to sit with today. How do we become the kind of person that regularly listens and hears from God? I'm going to leave you with three things that I want you to remember as you start to think about how do I become the kind of person who listens to God. But before I do, I want to talk about this analogy. I think listening to God or practicing listening to God, it works kind of like tuning an instrument. If you ever tuned a guitar, you know that like sometimes you can do it with tuning forks, right? And that tuning fork plays the same note. And when you do, you start to turn, what are they called, tuners? Yeah, the tuners on the guitar to match that note. And you kind of hear, and then you'll have to wiggle a little bit more to loosen and tighten the string so that you get the right note. God is like that tuning fork. He's clear, he's consistent. It's the same sound over and over again. He is there. You're like the instrument. You need to change the way that you're listening, the tuning that is happening in order to hear it clearly. And that's where we're going to begin. The first thing that I want to talk about when we're talking about how to listen for God is we need to let go of the idea of listening for God as a performance and instead think of it as a posture. We need to think about attunement and not achievement. So many of us sit in our prayer time, whatever that looks like, and we try to listen to God. We try to open up our minds, do all the things that me and Steven stand up here and tell you about, and you don't hear it, and then sometimes you just are like, fine, check, I did it, done. And it's like you're treating it like it's this task that you have to do. But actually, listening to God would have worked just fine in that waiting space, in that prayer, if you had changed the way that your attention is working in that moment. You see, attunement is actually about relational sensitivity to someone else. In this case, its attunement is relational sensitivity to God's movement and God's presence. Anyone who's ever been a parent of a young child knows exactly what this feels like. If you've been to a play date, you've been to a park, and you hear a kid start crying, what do? You like pause a little bit, and you think, my kid? My kid? Oh, not my kid. Oh, definitely my kid. And then you go running because you can recognize what? Their cry. Because your heart has been tuned in to their voice. Because you are attuned to them through relationship. Even if you're not a parent, you have this with people in your life, with family members and friends. You are attuned to their voice so much so that sometimes you can go up to them and not say a word, and you can know that something's off with them. Because your heart is so in line with their heart that you get it, that you can see it. You are attuned to them. And that is exactly what we need if we want to start hearing God in our life. And you think, well, gosh, what does that require? It requires the same 3 things that any relationship requires. Time, mostly. And then time leads to trust. And then trust leads to consistency. The first is the one we can control the most, and that's time. Time, your time to God. Your time, willingness to take time for God. Not just in increments of our time, but our attention as well. If you want to start hearing God, you have to prioritize that relationship so that you can be attuned to God's heart. The second thing that you need to remember when we're hearing God's voice is you have to let God lead. You have to let God lead. So many of us are like this young woman who came to me, and she had 2 job offers that she was trying to decide between. And God love her, she was really trying to discern faithfully and think about which one God wanted her to take. And she even came and saw me as part of this discernment process, and she's praying so much about these 2 options. You can tell it's really stressing her out. And she's talking to me about all the pros and cons and why God might want this and why God might want that, blah, 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 blah. And then in the middle of this, she kind of on a random side note says, hey, I'm just thinking about this video I saw yesterday on TikTok. It was so stupid. It's this video of this dog doing this agility training, but he couldn't do it. He kept sliding across the space. He kept running into cones. And she was like, I don't know. I just found it so funny. And then I read the caption, and the caption said still proud, still loved. And she was like, it was so stupid. I just started bawling. And I was like, huh. And I said, is it possible? Is it possible that that was God pulling up a chair next to you and saying, hey, you know that job that you think will prove that you're worth it? You know how you believe that this job choice is the end-all be-all? You know that you don't have to prove that to me, right? And she goes, yeah, but which job do I need to choose? So often, we want answers from God, and God only wants intimacy from us. God is not here to direct your life, and I know that that would be easier. I know it would be so much easier if God had a perfect plan for every decision that you are going to make, but it's not like that. You have freedom to direct your life. But what God does want to do is form your heart. And he does that by talking to us, by being with us. And so often we ignore those messages because they don't fit into our definition of success, of what we want, of what we think is important. But God determines the content of the conversation, not you. He decides when he talks and what he talks about. It is only your job to listen and to notice. And here's the thing, once you start to do this a while, you start to realize that those messages, those stupid videos on TikTok that make you cry all of a sudden, those little nudges that you feel, that those are actually the messages that you need to hear. That those are the messages that actually change you. That those are actually the answers you've always been looking for. The last thing that I think we need to keep in mind is that we always have to trust in what feels like silence. I get so many comments about silence, how we show up to scripture and I don't hear anything, I show up in prayer and I don't hear anything. There's so much silence. And there is, I'm not going to lie, there is a lot of silence when it comes to a relationship with God, or at least what we perceive as silence. You see, sometimes I think even though we try to tune our heart to God, we're not perfect. We mess up a lot. We miss the things that he's telling us all the time. And so sometimes what actually feels like silence is not silence at all. Because silence does not mean absence. It never means absence. How often have you been in a place where you've looked back at your life and thought, God, like I didn't see it then, but God actually was providing for me in this way. I didn't understand it then, but actually that was a move of God. So often. And we don't see it because, again, not bright, not so good. Yes? But sometimes in hindsight, we can see it. So in those silent places that exist, and they do exist, how can we trust in the Good Shepherd? Trust that he is with us, and that it is not his failure that is the silence. It is ours. Listening for God, learning to hear his voice, is possible. It is real. It is something that not happens sporadically, but over time, you can become attuned to God in a way where you hear God not just once in a random prayer time, but like a lot, regularly. That is the promise of the relationship, that he can know you and you can know him. But Jesus is a good shepherd. He doesn't expect you to get it off the bat. He knows you're dumb. And so he offers to take you one step at a time, one day at a time, 1 inch at a time, teaching you how to listen to his voice as long as you walk alongside him. As long as you're willing to be taught and willing to spend the time, he will teach you how to hear him, how to attune to his voice. And that voice, it comes in 1,000 ways. Lines in books, lyrics in songs, that repeated nudge that you feel, that repeated phrase that you hear over and over again, a friend's phone call, a friend's text message, nature, going outside to a certain coincidence that you find. God speaks in 1,000 ways. 1,000 ways. But our voice is not to control when God talks or how God talks or what God talks about. Our job is just to be there when he does. Just to be close enough to hear him when he does. And so that's the invitation today. Be a sheep. Be a good sheep. Listen well. Follow your shepherd. That's it. Let us pray. Lord, our world is so full of us wanting to be grander than we actually are. We want control and the ability to plan and design. And sometimes that makes us think that we're better than we are. Let us trust in your character, that you are the one speaking to us. And teach us how to listen closely, how to attune our heart to yours so that we can follow you, so that we can take step by step closer to become more like you. It is in your name that we pray. Amen.